Don't make dog food in front of the family. Bob ridicules me, loudly laughing. Dog food? Seriously? I'm at a loss for words in response to his harsh insult. What else could that awful stuff be called but dog food? Just redo it already. I quickly retort to Bob. What? I'm still out shopping though. Huh? Bob seems puzzled, but I don't care. I'm just getting my revenge on Bob in my own way. I'm Lucy, about to turn 50 this year. I have a daughter, but she's moved out, so now it's just me and my husband, Bob, living together. Bob works at a major employment advertising company. It's a well-known company, often featured in commercials. And maybe it's the influence of those around him, but Bob is extremely ambitious. The guy with the higher salary is the better man. That's Bob's mantra. He apparently works late every night, trying to increase his income even a bit. I secretly support Bob in his hard work. I met Bob through a friend's introduction. I work from home and don't have many chances to meet men. The last time I had a boyfriend was back in college. Worried about me, a friend introduced me to Bob through an acquaintance. My first impression of Bob was that he was fresh and stylish. He looked good in a suit, and his hairstyle was fashionable. To me, who rarely dressed up, he seemed like someone from a different world. But Bob was straightforward, saying, I'm busy with work and can't meet often, but I'll cherish you, so please be kind. He extended his hand. Yes! I instantly liked Bob and shook his hand. After that, we started going out together more and more. Our dates were always just meals or cafes, and we could only meet for a short time. Often, Bob's mobile phone would ring during our dates, and he would have to leave abruptly. It's work. Sorry, but I have to go to the office. I'll make it up to you later, he would say, standing up to leave. It was sad, but I accepted it as part of work. Then, not long after, Bob proposed to me. I smiled and accepted. Naively, I thought happy days were ahead of me. Little did I know it was just the beginning of hell. Now, nearly 25 years have passed. Lately, Bob comes home late. Since the beginning of our marriage, he has been working overtime and only comes home late at night. He doesn't even eat the meals I prepare. He just comes home to sleep. We hardly ever talk. That's why I once voiced my opinion to Bob early in our marriage. Can't you come home a bit earlier? Let's have a meal together once in a while. To which Bob angrily replied, Since when did you start giving me orders? You think you're better than me now? I was shaken by the expression on Bob's face, something I had never seen before our marriage. I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry. I immediately apologized to Bob. My lack of experience in relationships made me terribly unsettled, but Bob wouldn't forgive me. Don't act all high and mighty with your little income, talking back to me. That's all he said before locking himself in the room. Bob didn't speak to me for about a week after that. I deeply regretted my words. So I make sure not to say to Bob, I want you to come home early. And since the beginning of our marriage, I've always spoken to Bob with utmost respect. Bob holds outdated views. A woman should silently follow behind, respect and obey me. He'd say it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I lost my parents to illness at a young age, so I didn't have a clear picture of what a normal family should be like. And at that time, I was deeply in love with Bob. The thought of breaking up over something like this seemed unbearable. So, yes, I had no choice but to comply with Bob's domineering statements. Bob used to be a very kind person before our marriage. He always cared for me, never forced me to use respectful language or look down on me. I'm sure Bob will return to the man he was before we married. That hope was all I clung to, day by day. But in the end, Bob never reverted to his pre-marriage self in those 25 years. I spent my days crushed by despair, somehow getting by. Then one day, I'm home, tired, I'm going to take a bath. Bob yawned as he walked in. Welcome home, the bath is ready for you. I hurried to greet him. The clock showed 2 a.m. He probably came by taxi. I was putting away his jacket when, I sensed something was off. There was a scent of perfume on Bob's jacket. He always wore cologne before going to work, but this scent was new to me. I wanted to confront him right away, but he was already in the bath, and confronting him would probably just lead to him lashing out. The perfume alone wasn't solid evidence. Reluctantly, I decided not to ask Bob about it. Weeks passed. Bob's jacket still carried the unfamiliar scent of perfume. By then, my feelings for Bob had cooled. A man who might be cheating? No thanks. Bob always underestimated me. Bob probably thinks I won't bring up divorce. And even if we divorced, it might not affect him much. I didn't make any overt moves. Then one day, Bob suddenly spoke to me. Next Sunday, we're having a family dinner at my parents'. Make sure you help Mom out that day. Yes. Every summer, Bob's family gathers for a meal at his parents' house. I've always helped Susan, my mother-in-law, with the preparations, mainly cleaning and tidying up. Susan is the one who cooks. I mainly focus on cleaning and tidying up. Since Bob's father passed away last year, we didn't have the dinner. Thinking about all this, Bob seemed excited. Kate will be back too, after a long time. Kate is our only daughter, currently away for university. Bob adores Kate. Yes, she is. I replied indifferently. And so, the day of the family dinner with the relatives arrived. I had been busy preparing at my in-laws' house since morning, meticulously cleaning the living room, which was to be the venue. Susan was polishing a bookshelf. I threw my back out the other day. It's terrible to have you do all this, Lucy, she said. Susan is delicate in appearance and incredibly kind to me, a stark contrast to Bob. In the midst of this, Bob arrived at his parents' house. Lucy, are you properly helping Mom? She has a bad back, so make sure you take care of the relatives too. Bob said this loudly, laughing. Bob! Susan scolded him, but he didn't listen at all. Shut up. I just wish Kate would arrive already. Bob then went off to his old room, probably planning to relax there until the event started. Then, we're out of alcohol. Could you go buy some? Susan said. Yes, I'll go now. I hurried off to the supermarket. While buying a large amount of alcohol, my mobile phone rang. It was Bob calling. I sighed in frustration but couldn't ignore the call. Hello? I answered the phone reluctantly. Bob seemed to be in the living room already, the call noisy. Relatives must have started arriving at the in-laws. Then, unbelievably, Bob said over the phone, Don't make dog food in front of the relatives. Bob ridiculed me loudly, laughing. Huh? I was puzzled by Bob's words. I threw all the dinner out into the yard. He was so loud. Due to Bob's shouting, a relative said, Bob, that's too rude to Lucy, isn't it? The food looked delicious, and throwing it in the yard? What a waste. Defending me. Dog food? Seriously? I was at a loss for words in response to his harsh insult. Bob didn't care how I or anyone else felt. What else could that awful stuff be called but dog food? Just redo it already. Bob taunted me with a loud laugh. I quickly retorted to Bob. What? I'm still out shopping, though. I couldn't possibly serve dinner at this moment. Huh? Bob sounded confused. I'm at the supermarket right now, and it's a 40-minute drive from here. How could I possibly make dinner? I argued back, but Bob was unconvinced. Then who made this meal? It's still warm and obviously freshly made. Mom said she didn't make it, so it must be you. Bob was puzzled, but I didn't care. Anyway, I'll head back there now. We can talk then. I ended the call with Bob. Whatever hell Bob was about to face, it didn't matter to me. He'll probably regret it a lot. But that's fine. I was just getting my revenge on Bob in my own way. I'm back with the purchases. I returned to my in-laws' house with bags of alcohol from the supermarket. Lucy, sorry for the trouble. Susan spoke hesitantly to me, probably having heard Bob's earlier rude remarks. She seemed a bit uncomfortable. Just as I was responding to Susan, Bob rushed to the entrance. Seeing me, he started yelling, Lucy, cut it out! Making such unappetizing food and then denying it? Your cooking isn't fit for humans anyway. Bob, how can you say such rude things to Lucy? Susan scolded Bob, but he didn't listen. Mom, you should teach Lucy how to be a proper wife, Bob said boldly, his face brimming with confidence, as if he couldn't possibly be wrong. It's amazing how he can insult people like this. I sighed heavily at Bob's nastiness. What? Bob seemed irritated by my sigh, glaring at me intensely. No need to show mercy to someone who looks down on others like this. I was determined to thoroughly put Bob in his place, so I said with a smile, Actually, I didn't make today's meal. Shall I call the person who did? Huh? Bob looked puzzled. You can come out now, I called to the person hiding in another room. As they appeared, Bob's face went pale. Trembling. Dad, sorry for making dog food, said Kate, Bob's beloved daughter. No, that's a misunderstanding. I thought Lucy made it. Why did you cook in hiding? Bob, flustered, asked Kate. I asked Kate to do it. I told Bob. Mom, did you know about Kate? Bob asked. Susan nodded, her face pale. I asked Susan to keep quiet because I wanted to surprise you with Kate's cooking, I said. Susan knew Bob adored Kate, so she happily collaborated when I suggested surprising Bob with Kate's cooking. I'm excited to see Bob's surprised face. I felt guilty for deceiving enthusiastic Susan, who believed Bob and I were getting along. So she must be even more shaken by what's happening right in front of her. I explained to a shaken Susan. Unfortunately, Bob and I aren't getting along at all. He just comes home to sleep, and he's cheating. That's... Susan's face turned ashen. Don't say things like that without proof, Bob shouted at me. I have evidence, I said, handing Bob an envelope with documents. Bob said, What is this? Bob started reading, his face growing paler. So I said firmly, Bob, it seems you didn't notice, but recently there was a strong scent of woman's perfume on you. That's why I hired a private detective, and honestly, the amount of evidence that came up was shocking. I had always thought Bob's late homecomings were due to work, but the detective's findings revealed he had been cheating all along. Apparently, Bob had a history of liaising with women from work and business partners. I said to Bob in a calm voice, It's amazing, really. While I was balancing work, house chores, and childcare, you were out having fun with other women. Bob, looking frustrated, fell silent. I continued, ignoring him. And recently, you can't cheat unless you give them brand name bags, right? You need to pay to get attention. Poor thing. Is that why you've been holding back on contributing to household expenses? Bob had been reluctant to give money for household expenses lately. Kate's moved out, so we don't need that much for household expenses, he'd argue. Even when I objected, Bob wouldn't give any money. I had to cover it with my income. It turns out he was using it to fund his affairs. The relatives who had gathered at the entrance looked quite shocked. Bob, to cheat when you have such a good wife, that's despicable for a man, they said, looking disgusted. I declared to Bob, I'm divorcing you, Bob. You might as well remarry one of your affairs. Of course, I'll be taking a fair settlement. Bob was visibly shaken by the mention of divorce. Don't divorce me. I've spent most of our savings on my affairs. I can't afford a divorce. I was baffled by Bob's selfish reasoning. The detective's report indicated that Bob had been taking his mistresses to expensive restaurants and buying them designer bags. No wonder there were no savings left despite his high-paying job. The worst, the relatives muttered, looking at Bob with disdain. Kate was silently glaring at him too. Finally realizing the mood, Bob looked awkward. I began speaking to Bob matter-of-factly. Do you really think such a selfish excuse will work? And now you're relying on my income, which you've always looked down upon as mere home-based work. Work from home is just a side job, right? My high-profile corporate job is obviously more respectable, Bob declared arrogantly. He clearly hadn't reflected on his actions and still looked down on my job. It was necessary to damage Bob's pride. I delivered a massive shock to him. I'm a freelance engineer. My income varies, but annually, it's not much different from yours, I informed him. What? What do you mean? Bob was visibly shaken. I graduated from a distance learning university and joined a major telecommunications company. Now, as an independent contractor, I had a steady stream of work thanks to my career background. Given my income level, it's impossible to maintain our current lifestyle without any financial contribution from Bob lately. Explaining this, Bob slumped down, dejected. I can't believe Lucy earns as much as me. The fact that my income was higher than he expected seemed to be a huge shock to him. If I had known earlier, I could have divorced sooner, but I didn't want to make Kate live with a single parent. I continued. Kate is still single, and being from a single-parent household might affect her marriage prospects, so I hesitated to divorce. Hearing this, Bob, who had been downcast, suddenly turned to Kate and begged. Kate, you don't want your parents to divorce, right? Tell Lucy to reconsider. Despite his pleas, Kate looked at him coldly. Kate? Bob was clearly confused. Kate sighed deeply and said to Bob, Dad, I'm disappointed in you. I want Mom to be happy, even if it means divorce. I'll marry someone who's okay with a single parent. I don't care about you anymore. Kate said, turning away from Bob. When I told her everything, she was furious. I don't need a dad like that. He's been cheating and not providing financially. Go all out, Mom. I'll support you, she encouraged, leading to our plan. Bob always criticized everything I did, so I anticipated he'd disparage the cooking. His reaction was more extreme than I expected, but it only hastened Kate's detachment from him. Don't abandon me, please, Bob pleaded, tears streaming down his face as Kate rejected him. Pitiful man, I muttered. Susan and the other relatives kept their distance from Bob. No one was there to comfort him. Given his past actions, it was a natural consequence. Bob remained there, crying for a while. Our divorce was eventually finalized, but it was difficult as Bob vehemently opposed it. In the lawyer's office, I won't divorce no matter what, he kept saying. Clearly, he didn't want a divorce because he was out of money, but there was plenty of evidence of his infidelity. Finally, if you don't agree to the divorce, I'll increase the compensation amount, I declared. Bob turned pale and sweating profusely. I'm sorry, I'll agree to the divorce. He finally responded that way. Bob's mistress dumped him afterward, leaving him broke and unable to pay her. I also demanded compensation from the mistress, who had approached Bob for his money. Now a penniless middle-aged man, Bob no longer interested her. And so, Bob ended up alone, living a very lonely life. Bob tried to contact Kate. I can't see someone who cheats as a father, and blocked his calls. This sentiment spread among Bob's family, too. After exposing Bob's infidelity in front of Susan and the relatives, it seems everyone has distanced themselves from him. Bob, through his lawyer and in tears, apologized. I'm truly sorry. I'm so lonely now, with no one around me. Please, can we start over? Then maybe Kate and Mom will interact with me as before. Bob must be desperate to say such things. Being alone in his 50s must be hard. But it's all his own doing. He really needs to reflect deeply on his past actions. I insisted that my lawyer firmly communicate my refusal to reconcile. Time passed and it was the end of the year. I moved out of the house I shared with Bob, using the settlement money as a down payment for an apartment. It's spacious enough for one person and has several rooms. Today, Kate is visiting for the holidays. When I asked, Don't you want to visit Dad? Kate grimaced. I'll never forgive Dad. Besides, celebrating the new year with just Mom is fun, she said with a smile. Life with Bob was tough, but I persevered because of Kate. She's my treasure. Thank you, Kate, I said, expressing my heartfelt gratitude. Kate blushing. I'm really glad you're my mom. Thank you. And she replied. I wondered what life would be like after the divorce, but my work remained stable and I had Kate. I'm not thinking about remarriage yet. I'll take my time to consider it. My second life has just begun. At the dawn of a new year, I resolved to continue striving forward.